Welcome to another exciting episode of Economics with Aaron. Today's topic is Crusaderism, and it's not technically economics, but it's a topic that I think needs to be discussed because it's something that every conservative, libertarian, or maybe just any thinker thinks about, and in that it's an undescribed phenomenon. The reason that compelled me to do this presentation was that I noticed a trend or relationship or behavior that you would see primarily out of people on the left, but not just people on the left. And it took some time to sit down and figure out what was going on. After sitting down and thinking it through, I figured out, I realized what was going on, and I termed it Crusaderism. Now, there is no term called Crusaderism before this, but that is in part some of my goal, is to define what Crusaderism is, term it, so when we see it as a phenomenon out there, say, that's Crusaderism, and explain why this is a very bad thing, why it's a threat, and why we ought to really take a look at it and define it and be able to identify it. So here's our outline today, what we're going to cover. We're going to define Crusaderism, going to look at the key tenets of Crusaderism, go through a couple case studies so you can see, this is Crusaderism in action, that is a crusader, talk about the consequences of Crusaderism, and look at what can be done to prevent or stop it. The first part, what is Crusaderism? Now, I define it as this: when a person takes up a crusade or a cause, not for the cause itself, but rather for personal gain, be it financial, psychological, or emotional. And you could say, well, so what? So someone joins the American Association of Quadriplegic Turtles. What is the harm in that? Well, it seems innocent at first, but as you'll see, we will see. Now, permit me to show you 4 examples. We have here 4 people: Osama bin Laden, Mark Dayton, what I call the high school vegan kid, and then what I also call the Sean Hannity trophy wives. Right? Now, at first you would say, well, okay, what do these 4 people have in common? And seemingly nothing, but let's take a look at some of the similar traits of the 4. The first trait that they have in common is that they're all typically from upper echelons of society, upper middle income, or just plain out rich. And what that allows them to do is, since they are rich or pretty off well-to-do, is they have a lot of free time on their hands. They don't really have to work if they don't want to. And so they face a choice. They say, well, I could work really hard if I wanted to, but I don't have to. So typically the human, if given the choice of working really hard or not, they'll say, nah, I'd rather do something fun and relaxing. Well, that doesn't really result in a career or anything productive. So what they end up having to do is find some kind of crusade or cause to give themselves some kind of worth, to give themselves, point at it and say, look, this is what I do. Right? But the key thing is, though, that they don't want to work hard at it. So therefore, they decide to champion a crusade or a cause. And I say, okay, what's wrong with that? If some rich celebrity, again, wants to champion the cause for quadriplegic turtles, that's fine. But there are 2 final traits that are involved in Crusaderism. Final trait number 1, they come before the cause. Understand, they are not joining this cause because they actually care about the quadriplegic turtles or the poor starving children in Africa. They're doing it first and foremost for themselves. The cause is actually secondary. The second final trait, and this is where it gets particularly dark, is where they put themselves or the cause ahead of society. They never ask whether or not they should actually be pursuing this cause, or whether this cause is actually for the benefit of society, or whether they should force it down society's throat. That never even occurs to them. They are primarily concerned about having a cause or crusade that gives them worth. Now, let's go ahead and revisit the 4 here. We have Osama bin Laden, and not to delve too deeply into his background, you can look it up later. But frankly, the guy was a Saudi trust fund baby. His dad was incredibly wealthy, a construction magnate over in Saudi Arabia. And Osama bin Laden faced a choice, okay? Do I go into engineering, civil engineering, maybe follow the footsteps of my father? Well, that takes effort. You'd have to learn calculus, and you'd have to study hard, and you'd have to be disciplined. Or, what he did instead is he became a crusader. He pioneered, the Islamic crusade. We're going to go and I'm going to become the world's greatest terrorist ever. Which, not a great thing, but is certainly much more romantic in the classical literature sense. It's much more romantic to be this heroic crusader going against the United States and flying planes into buildings. So he ends up championing the crusade of Islam. Another one, Mark Dayton. Not to imply that Mark Dayton is anything like Osama bin Laden, but let's take a look at Mark Dayton again. Mark Dayton, if you don't know him, if you're not from Minnesota, is the heir to the Dayton Empire. His grandfather started Dayton's, which then became Federated or Macy's or whatever, as well as the Target Corporation. So Mark Dayton is very well off. Right? Now again, Mark Dayton as a young child had a choice. Well, do you want to go in engineering, accounting? Do you want to start a career? What does he do? He goes and he majors in psychology. Right? He then becomes a teacher for about a 5-year stint, works in various public sector jobs. And at a very young age, back in 1982, what does Mark Dayton decide to do? Well, he decides to run for public office. Now, public office, that is probably the most noble of crusades, because you are now saying, I am going to go into a position of power to tell other people what to do. So you better be pretty altruistic, and you also better be pretty wise and educated and informed about how the real world works. The question is, did that ever occur to Mark Dayton? Well, obviously not. Ever since 1982, he's been running for public office. Not because he actually cares about society, not because he cares about the people of Minnesota, but because Daddy's little trust fund baby is bored. He has nothing else to do. Right? So he became a senator in 2000, did not get reelected, very poor senator, I might add. And surprise, surprise, what is he doing now? He's running for governor. Right? Again, not because he actually cares about the citizens of Minnesota, but because he wants something to do. And to be intellectually honest, I'm half his age, and I'm infinitely more qualified to run for governor than Mark Dayton will ever be, simply because I've actually put myself through life and supported myself and have more in common with the average man. But Mark Dayton, it doesn't matter. Now, the high school vegan kid. This is just a picture I pulled up from the internet. This is not to say these people are the high school vegan kid, but you've seen them. You've seen them out there in high school. They're kind of the weird-looking kid, never kissed a girl, not really good at any sports, probably not that good at school itself either, and they're looking for belonging. So all of a sudden, surprise, surprise, they become a vegetarian. Well, why did they become a vegetarian? Was it because they actually believed in, animals and so forth and stuff like that? Or was it because they just simply wanted a cause? They wanted a crusade. They wanted to feel good about themselves. And you can say, well, all right, so the high school vegan kid, just for social acceptance, claims he's a vegetarian as long as he doesn't proselytize or anything like that. Well, how many of them then become members of ELF, or ALF, the Animal Liberation Front, or the Earth Liberation Front? There again, you see the jump from what a relatively harmless crusade into something where people are now, engaging in acts of eco-terrorism, forcing their ideology upon society by destroying Humvee dealerships or destroying suburbanite developments and stuff like that. The question again, do they do it because they generally believe in the earth or animal rights or things like that, or are they doing it for their own ego so they can feel really good about themselves? The Sean Hannity trophy wife. Right? Understand, Crusaderism does not just relegate itself to the left. It disproportionately does, but to be intellectually honest, this can happen on all sides of the political spectrum. And I like to point out the Sean Hannity trophy wife. Imagine, you will, the young little Amy who goes to college, gets her degree in philosophy or women's studies, and champions all the correct liberal causes. Well, she goes off, grows up, gets out of college, she ends up having a couple kids, marries an engineer, and the engineer makes all the money. Now she's the stay-at-home mom, and she's not quite where she wanted to be. She's not, she's now 30, and she is not that independent, kick-butt woman that she thought she'd be in her 20s and her professors told her that she would be. Well, her life might have a void at that point in time. Well, what is there to listen to during the daytime while taking care of the little brats? Well, you got Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Glenn Beck, and it's very easy then for the woman at that point in time to champion this cause. Like, oh, look, here's a problem, here's a crusade, here's something I can enjoy. I'm going to join the Tea Party, I care about my children's future. The question is this, whether or not she may be by accident championing the correct crusade, the question is whether she could actually explain to you why she believes in free markets, why liberty is great, quote things from the federal budget, versus just regurgitate talking points that she may have gotten from the Tea Party. All right, now, a fifth and another example, this was not one of the original four, but to show you an actual practical real-world example here, is a young lady named Jessica Asif. I was listening to NPR because there was nothing else on the radio in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin. But long story short, she was a high school student over in Marin County, well-to-do county over by San Francisco, and she decided that she was going to start the Teams for Safe Cosmetics. Okay, and the reason was that there was a possibility, no, it's not proven by the FDA, a possibility that there were some chemicals that may have an absolute, infinitesimal chance of causing cancer in rats on Tuesdays. So she decides with some of her friends to draft some legislation and skip school to go down to the California State Legislature, where they camp out and wait for Arnold Schwarzenegger to come in so that they can, tender their legislation to the governor. Well, she succeeded. They ended up getting the legislation passed because the California State Legislature is going to listen to little children. And now she feels all good and wonderful about herself. But here's the problem. If you look here, I'll read. It was scary, says Jessica Asif, 17 years old, who's waiting for word on her early application to Brown University. Ms. Asif, whose parents sent her to the $29,800 a year Branson School of North San Francisco. This isn't college. This is a high school there, kids. Is working hard, blah, 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 hazards of cosmetics. Okay? Obviously, she didn't have to flip burgers at McDonald's to make ends meet and build up a college fund. This is, again, the upper income. She has the luxury to go and afford these crusades. We're still, if you read here, for Jessica Asif, that day in 2005, waiting outside the governor's office was pivotal. Where she once intended to pursue a career in medicine, very noble, very productive, God bless you. She now has a new plan: apply to Brown University, earn a law degree, and undertake a career in public health. Now we have a lawyer. We had a doctor, something very noble and productive, and now we're going to have a lawyer who's going to go into public health and probably dictate to you what's going to happen. Right? This is a crusader at heart. This is a perfect example of a crusader. Jessica Asif never asked the question whether or not you were okay with the cosmetics. Jessica Asif never asked the question whether or not the risks of these chemicals were actually overstated. It was Jessica Asif being bored and looking for something to do that wasn't working at McDonald's, flipping burgers next to Jose or shoveling poo next to me, which is what I did when I was in high school. Right? It's not so much one girl goes and does this. It's the concern that people are putting themselves ahead of society. And they have no problems forcing a crusade down people's throats, either through legislation or through lobbying or protesting or what have you. And this is the true danger of Crusaderism, where people are putting themselves ahead of other people. These people have an effect on society. And so whereas there may be a difference between, the high school vegan kid, there is certainly some ramifications with Osama bin Laden flying planes into our buildings. Now, part two, let's take a look at some of the key tenets of Crusaderism, delve into it a little bit more deeply. One, upper income. We already talked about this. You basically have to have enough money, either through parents or through fortune, that you don't actually have to face the real harsh realities of life, whereby you have to work for a living and actually slave away and answer to reality. The rule of thumb I apply here is if you don't have to pay your way through college, chances are you're pretty prone or predisposed to become a crusader, and that you live so much of your life up until 23, 24, not having to pay for anything, you get accustomed to that and don't really have to work, or you don't even believe that you're ever going to have to work for in the real world. Tenet 2 is laziness, right? And that you don't really, once you get to college, you say, well, I don't really want to work. Well, you don't have to. Everything's paid. Mark Dayton doesn't have to work for a living. He doesn't really have to. So you have the intellectual dishonesty of saying, well, I could work a real career. I could go into engineering. I could go into accounting. I could go into medicine. Or I could major in fluff. And this is, the telltale sign of this is the college degree. If you look at the Crusaders, you're going to see a perfect correlation between Crusaders and worthless degrees. So you'll see political science, you'll see divinity, that's actually an odd one that comes up, sociology, hyphenated American studies like women's studies, Chicano studies, things like that. My all-time favorite, English, because you've only been speaking it your entire life, so I hope you speak it even better when you come out of college. Regardless, it shows you that they have never looked at the labor market and said, what do I need to study to get a return on my investment? They don't go to college because it's an investment. They go to college because it's a hobby and it's fun. Tenet 3 is just at a crusade. And the crusades, it really doesn't matter what the crusade is. It can be anything. It could be the quadriplegic turtles. It could be radical Islam. It's just that you have to have something that will give you meaning. Now I want to delve into the Crusades, kind of show you what you can expect to see, but the most earliest example of a crusade you're going to see is going to be your college crusade. So here I have, you know, Oberlin Students for a Free Palestine, the Social Justice Club, and for fun I just typed in Google, students against, and then Google fills it in for you. Drunk driving, hunger, vector exploitation, violence everywhere, and genocide, and obviously because that's needed to counter the radical student group, Students for Genocide. Regardless, you see the college crusades, and there's one thing that they have in common, and that is they're never going to succeed. No matter what the college students do, there's still going to be hunger, there's still going to be drunk driving, there's still going to be genocide. But again, it's never been about actually bringing an end to these things that are harmful to society. It's though that the student has a group to belong to and feels like they're doing something aside from majoring in political science. Another great example, and you'll see this, is in the celebrity world, where you have celebrities that will champion various crusades and causes. Because celebrities, if you get successful, you have a lot of money. And, you know, and good for them if they actually earned it and, you know, they were a nobody and they become famous later on. But still, the psychology remains. Here they are, they all of a sudden have this a tremendous amount of wealth. They really don't work for a living. I know they'll say, oh, acting is very tough. No, it really isn't. It's a kosher cake little job. So they feel like they have to do something else. Now, the example I provide here is from the movie Tropic Thunder, which is an awesome movie, directed by Ben Stiller. And here you see Ben Stiller playing Tug Speedman, his character in the movie, where it's pandas, their survival is not so black and white. Well, obviously, Ben Stiller is mocking all the various celebrities that champion all these various charitable causes, not because they actually believe in the cause, but because they're bored and they want to feel good about themselves. Now, this is fictitious and from the movie Black Thunder, but you see it every day here. For example, Sandra Bullock. Right? Somebody please explain to me, what is it with the women in Hollywood adopting kids from these third world countries? Now, this is not to say what Sandra Bullock has done here isn't noble. You know, no doubt this kid is going to enjoy a better life because Sandra Bullock adopted him. I'd enjoy a better life if Sandra Bullock would adopt me. But it behooves the question between her, Angelina Jolie, and Madonna, is it a fad? Is this fashionable? Are they really doing it for the kid, or are they doing it for themselves? Bono and his non-stop crusade to help poor countries in Africa with the alleviation of third world debt. The question you have to ask is, has Bono made a difference? The answer is no. The World Cup, the soccer games, have made more of an economic difference in South Africa and Africa in general than Bono ever will, because that's economics. Bono don't know anything about industrialization, economics, finance. He just knows how to sing marginally okay songs that middle-aged people who are drunk like. What is particularly scary, though, is what I like to call the career crusaders. And here you see this with none other than the UN. The UN is charted with all these various responsibilities, you know, controlling nuclear arms, poverty in Africa, eliminating child poverty, eliminating diseases, stopping terrorism, all of which they have spectacularly failed at doing. The UN has been a failed organization. The problem is, if you think that they're actually in the business of solving problems, then you don't see them for what they really are. The UN real purpose, what the UN really is nothing more than an employment vehicle for people with worthless degrees or connections. And here you see UN's ballooning 732 million Haitian peacekeeping budget goes mostly to its own personnel. No. Really? You mean the Haitians were never part of the deal? Again, they take the crusade, the poor people in Haiti suffering from the earthquake, and they use it for their own psychological purposes, or in this case, financial purposes. The real purpose of the crusade is this. It is to make the crusader feel good, a hobby to keep the crusader from being bored, and a reason to give the crusader's worthless life some kind of meaning or worth. That is what the crusade is all about. Now, tenet 4 is arrogance or egomania or egomaniaism. I don't know what the correct term is. And here it's where, the individual puts the cause and the crusade and themselves against society. And they're never question, the way you see it is they never ask the question, two things, to see if the crusade is either moral or feasible. Right? For example, Bob Geldof. Let's talk about Bob Geldof. He says, we must do something even if it doesn't work. This is in response to, again, Live Aid in Africa. He's championed various causes in Ethiopia. Noble, and that's good. But look at that statement. We must do something even if it doesn't work. Well, let's take a look at Bob Geldof. Bob Geldof, singer, songwriter, very popular in Britain and Europe. I never heard of him. The only reason I heard of him is because of his charitable efforts. But if you look at him, he's failed, along with Bono. They have not brought about an end of poverty in Africa. Well, if you look at the statement, we must do something even if it doesn't work, translate that into what a crusader says, and this is what Bob Geldof is really saying. We need to do something even if it doesn't abate poverty, because then my ego gets stroked and I feel good, and that's certainly worth wasting billions of dollars of other people's money. Bob has never asked about whether it's feasible. And if it's not feasible, then why do it? Because it makes Bob feel good. And if we get some taxpayer dollars and some charitable money, and we can waste it on some, concert, well, some people had some fun, but guess what? The truth is, people in Africa are still starving and nothing has really improved. The best example, though, if you want to take a look at the arrogance, where they put themselves ahead of society, never ask whether they're right, whether they have a moral right to start telling people what to do, let alone whether it's feasible, is Corporate Accountability International's campaign to retire Ronald McDonald. Their campaign is aiming to get Ronald McDonald out of McDonald's, which would be like getting baseball out of America. And the reason why is because they claim that Ronald McDonald is causing childhood obesity. Forget whether parents should be in charge of their own children. Forget whether Corporate Accountability International has a right to tell a private company who they can and cannot have as a mascot, let alone proselytize to society that we should eat this and we shouldn't eat that. That never occurs to them. They never question the morality or the feasibility. They never question whether they have a place in this argument. They just dictate that they do. Right? So ask yourself, what kind of people are in Corporate Accountability International? Well, if you look at their profile, here we go. Kelly Lulaher, I can't pronounce her name, so that's how I'll pronounce it from henceforth. And you can read through her background if you want. But prior to joining Corporate Accountability International, Lulaher taught math in the Central African Republic. Again, feasible. How is the Central African Republic nowadays? And it worked to empower homeless youth in Seattle. So they're empowered, but they're still poor. She holds degrees in, get ready, French philosophy and mathematics from Seattle University. So 1 out of 2 ain't bad. Right? The question is, did she actually join a Corporate Accountability International or work in the Central African Republic because she cared about people? Or did she do it because she had no employment prospects and wanted to have something to do so she could feel good about herself, and gave no regard as to whether or not she should be telling people what to do? You look at some more of the staff here, Corporate Accountability International, Stacy Folsom, 2001, she played a lead role on several electoral campaigns, including for the re-election of Senator Jeff Bingham. You're going to see a correlation with politics. She has no additional background like that, but she doesn't have a degree in accounting. And then we look at Patty Lynn. She holds an MA in International Peace Studies and a BA in Political Science from the University of Notre Dame. Okay? A Master's in International Peace Studies. I didn't even know there was enough material to get an associate's in International Peace Studies, let alone and no doubt you can get a doctorate in it. Again, this is proof positive that these people had no intention whatsoever of actually becoming productive members of society, and find nothing wrong with going and villainizing and assailing different aspects of society so that they have a crusade and they have some kind of career. Now, there's more people at Corporate Accountability International, but if you want, you can go to this website here, look up their staff and board, do it as a homework assignment, and see how many of these people actually have some kind of skill to offer society, or are basically a bunch of liberal arts majors who have nothing to offer society, but have no problem forcing society to do what they want so they can feel good about themselves. Now, step 5 takes on a religious fervor. Understand the Crusader has nothing else in life. They only have their crusade. It's the only thing that gives them value and worth. So if you dare criticize their crusade, or not even the crusade itself, because usually the crusades are noble, but criticize their motives in championing this crusade, they will vehemently respond and retaliate against you. And since they can't point to the fact that their crusade has failed and that it's not feasible, let alone moral, let alone whether they have a right to be championing this crusade, they immediately start calling you names. Now, understand the religious aspect of it. For example, if you're not a Muslim, you're traditionally called the infidel. If you're not a Christian, you're typically called the heathen. So you have these names here. But you see today nothing more than a modern version of the infidel heathen pejorative, where if you're against socialism, obviously you're a teabagger or a Nazi. If you're you don't believe in global warming, you're a global warming denier. And if you're against illegal immigration, you're obviously a racist. Never mind, you might have legitimate concerns or questions about these. If you are against the crusade, you are immediately bad, and you are labeled as such with various pejoratives. Tenet 6 is cowardice, and this is one of the most despicable aspects of Crusaders. Understand, you don't champion bad things. You don't say, I'm for kicking puppies. All right? I'm for bashing in the shins of the nuns. These are not things you champion. Every crusade is noble. All right? But if you ever question, again, the ulterior motives of the crusader, let alone the feasibility of the crusade, the crusader will immediately take the crusade and hide behind it. Great example is public education. All right? If you have sincere, legitimate concerns about the finances of the public schools and whether we're getting our bang for our buck and whether the kids are getting actually educated, legitimate adult concerns, it does not take a millisecond for the teachers union to grab the kid, put a gun to the kid's head and say, give us more money or else the kid gets it. Right? They are cowards. They hide behind the noble child, the innocent child, so they can advance their own aims. Now, it's not just the teachers' unions that do this, but again, if you're critical of poverty relief efforts in Africa, obviously you are against blacks. If you're against illegal alien, sincere, legitimate, security, economic concerns, again, you're racist. They hide behind the morality and nobility of the crusade and thereby mute your argument so that you're now on the defensive trying to defend yourself of being against kids or something like that. Tenet 7, hypocrisy. Not so much that they are abusing a crusade to make themselves feel better, but rather a disproportionate amount of crusaders fall into the left-leaning political spectrum. Right? And what's great about this is that the vast majority of crusaders have had their wealth and have their luxurious standards of living owed to one thing and one thing only, and that's capitalism. You'll see no end of the number of children crusaders who are children of, barons of industry and people who worked hard and make a lot of money and owe their cushy little lifestyle to the free market. But then, while they're in college and for the rest of their lives, do nothing but rail against capitalism and criticize the system that afforded their wealth. A perfect example is your typical, college kid nowadays, where they go out and they protest because it's fun and down with the system, man, and corporations ain't paying their fair share, and man, I'm going to major in philosophy and philosophize, while their dad and mom are slaving away at some job to put food on the table and put their kid through college. Right? Now that's very common, but let's take a look at another group of people, the Kennedys. Patrick and Joseph, they were the grandfather, great-grandfather of, I guess, the modern-day, current generation of Kennedys. You can look through the genealogy. And they're the ones that started the finance. They're the ones that built up the empire. They started in bars. Thank you. It was pretty cool. Booze is good. And then moved into banking and so forth. Now, Bar JFK, the president, John F. Kennedy, what the heck have the rest of the Kennedys done except rally against the system that built up their family's original fortune? You look at Ted Kennedy, I don't think he ever voted for one pro-capitalist measure. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., you want to look at a screwball who's out there pissing away the trust fund and for various liberal causes, go ahead. And then Caroline Kennedy, she's in the arts. Isn't that? She's in the arts. She cares about the arts. That's wonderful. So, but again, you see the hypocrisy where these veritable children owe their lifestyle and their luxury to capitalism, but bite the hand that feeds them. The absolute perfect example, though, however, has got to be Bill Ayers. Bill Ayers had some associations, friend of Barack Obama's back in the olden days, professed communist, and now, surprise, surprise, a professor of education over at the University of Illinois. Back when he was in his youth, in the 60s, he had a crusade. He was going to rally against the man and was participating in some of the bombing of police stations and just a wonderful little spoiled trust fund baby brat. So you say, well, boy, I wish I could run around and bomb police stations and have the time to, espouse lofty thoughts like communism. How did he put food on the table? Well, guess who his dad is? Well, his dad's Thomas Ayers, chairman and CEO of Commonwealth Edison. The hypocrisy is just astounding. It's just astounding what a hypocritical little child Bill Ayers is. But now he's educating your children on how to educate other children, so, and no, never mind. The final tenet of Crusaderism is that there is no production. In the end, there's the Crusader on their deathbed, they're dying. They have not produced $1 of GDP. Not one penny of real economic production has been produced. Understand that since they have their lives paid for, right, and they do not go into a productive career, right, but rather go and say, well, we need charitable donations, we need this, we need that, and never ever get around to actually solving the ailments of society they profess to, intend to solve, by default, they have led a parasitic existence. They don't serve society at all. They just take resources from society and make themselves feel good with it. It's a sad life, but it really behooves the question, when a Crusader is lying there, have they tricked themselves so much into thinking that they actually did good? Or do deep down inside they have a twinge of guilt and realize, wow, I didn't do anything for society, and that's it. So that's the final tenet. Now there is one final aspect of Crusaderism, it's a very important aspect, and that is the destructive principle. Right? The destructive principle is this: it is easier to destroy something that already exists than to create something of value that is new. So, for example, if you, do you rally against corporations? Do you just protest against corporations and how they're evil? Or do you actually start a corporation yourself? Which one is easier? Well, it's obviously easier to just say corporations suck and then go and protest against them with no rhyme or reason. Right? Now you see this with the Ronald McDonald Nazis here. Much easier to crusade against Ronald McDonald than them go and actually start a restaurant or a corporation. What I find ultimately hypocritical is here they are, Corporate Accountability International, but not one of them have ever ran a corporation. They're going to criticize corporations, but they've never ran one themselves. Right? So you see the idea. It's just, well, here's an easy target. That's easy to shoot down. Let's do that and then I'll feel good. But a better example, rather, I should say, is something a little closer to home here, and that's the Stillwater Bridge. There's been a proposed bridge across the St. Croix River into Wisconsin, which would alleviate a lot of traffic along Highway 36. You can look up the map if you're curious about the geography. Long story short, it's been in the makings for about 15 years, and surprise, surprise, guess who keeps filing lawsuits against it and prevents it from ever getting built? The local chapter of the Sierra Club. Now, does the Sierra Club want to help advance society, build the bridge so we can alleviate a bunch of traffic so the rest of the world can get on with their lives and we can produce more? Not to mention, I think the Sierra Club would probably be a little bit concerned about all the global warming they're contributing, having 100,000 cars stacked up on Highway 36 for 2 hours at a time. But again, the hypocrisy, it doesn't matter. No, they're going to protest against the bridge. Why? Because it's an easy target. It's easier to protest against the bridge rather than get a real degree in engineering or civil engineering, build the bridge, and have a career in engineering or to have a career in traffic management. Right? Now, if you look at the profile, just to show you there's a correlation, I'm not making this up, I wonder what kind of background the local heads of the local chapter over at the Stillwater chapter of the Sierra Club have. We look here, Vicki Munson, chapter coordinator, Bachelor's of Science in Recreation and Park Administration. Then spent a few years in the Peace Corps in the Eastern Caribbean. Good, great resume. Right? Heather Cusick received her law degree from William Mitchell. You will see law coming up more, and I will show you why later. Then we go, my all-time favorite, God bless you, Joshua Hudak. Joshua has a Bachelor's of Science in Geography, so he can tell you where Highway 36 is, from the University of Iowa, and holds a Master's in Outdoor Education and Recreation from the University of Minnesota. He has a degree in camping, a master's degree in camping. All right, what do you do with that? No one hires you. You are by default condemned to be a crusader and doing nothing worthwhile with your life. And then we go to Stacy Kawakami. She's the chapter's gift planning committee. You'll see euphemisms coming along later. And she has a Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Economics. So there is a correlation. Again, you see the worthless degrees coming through. Now, there's just one major problem with the destructive principle, and it's this. What if your society is extremely successful to the point it has so much wealth it becomes the perfect breeding grounds for crusaders? What do the crusaders destroy? Understand the paradox here that's happening. If you have an incredibly successful nation, you have the wealth, and there are now generations. You can have trust fund babies. Back 1,000, 2,000 years ago, unless you're in royalty, there were no trust fund babies. Generation to generation had to make their way. Well, in the United States, we are so successful, we have a lot of wealth, which then gives generation after generation the financial possibility of never having to work for a living. Right? So this is now where the paradox comes in. If you're that successful, what ailments of society are the Crusaders going to go and attack and destroy? Well, they're going to go and attack the pillars of success. And understand the sick and twisted logic. The Crusader is so arrogant, they don't care to find out whether or not or why we are successful. They just need a target. And so what they do is they attack the pillars of success. And if you look right here, look at all this. This is all under attack right now. Individual freedom, capitalism, liberty, rugged individualism. Nobody can be, you cannot be a Tony Stark. You cannot think independently. You must believe in global warming. Individual choice, Judeo-Christian foundation. Not that I'm religious, but there's no denying that, a large part of our country was founded in Christian and Jewish doctrine. But that is under assault. And just plain innovation and creation. Everyone must conform and obey, corporate or government. Right? So the Crusader never asks why it's successful, never asks should we attack something that has made our country successful. I need a target. And because that's available, I'm going to go and criminalize it and attack it. Thus, why corporations are evil, yet, boy, I wish we had some jobs. So, all right, let's take a look at some case studies here. Al Gore, arguably the most perfect example of a crusader. If we look at his background, obviously rich, dad was a senator, and Al Gore tried. He went into the military, did serve in Vietnam, good, but he majored in English, but then majored in poli-sci, so that really increased his employment prospects. When he got back from Vietnam, went into divinity, and then into law school because Lord knows we need more lawyers. No private sector experience, none. Immediately goes into politics. What wisdom did Al Gore have to go into politics and dictate to the population what they're going to do? Well, he didn't. It's just that his daddy was rich, and why not? And dad had connections. And then you know the rest of the story. Vice president, ran for president, but failed. Now, Al Gore could have just quit and said, well, I got enough money after I didn't get elected. I'll go fishing. No, the ego is just too big. And so then he champions the greatest crusade that there ever was, global warming. Again, did Al Gore ever ask whether it was feasible or moral? Did Al Gore ever ask whether it was real? No, Al Gore is so arrogant and so totalitarian, he has no problem forcing this down. The $1 trillion worth of taxes, maybe $2 trillion, depending on what estimates you want to use, on the American people, so he gets to feel good about himself. Right? Adam Perlman. This is an interesting one. You say, well, who the heck is Adam Perlman? I call him the American comic book guy because he looks like comic book guy from The Simpsons. And you can see he's that fat, dumb kid from high school, played Dungeons and Dragons, which I did play too, but I grew up. Son of a urologist, upper middle income, lived in suburban California, Florida. And quote unquote, he was bored at 17 in life. So does he join the Vegetarian Association of California? Does he go and start a rock band? No, what he does is he becomes Adam Kaddan. He joins Al-Qaeda. This is the American terrorist that you see on the news every once in a while. Okay? Does Adam Perlman, I'm calling him Perlman because when you change your name just for, I don't respect that. Did Adam really believe in Islam? Chances are no. Did Adam really care whether or not people might want to have their own freedom of religion? Obviously not. Adam Kaddan cares about Adam Kaddan, and he's going to force you to be Islam because Adam Kaddan wants to feel good about himself. Karl Marx. Karl Marx, son of a lawyer. Pretty well-to-do family background. Marries a Prussian baron's daughter. Going up in the world. All right? He majors in philosophy and literature. good during the Industrial Revolution, and then basically had a lifestyle he couldn't afford and lived off money that was given to him by his buddy Frederick Engels, who in turn got his money from his dad who ran a textile factory. Now, notice they're living off of a capitalist system here, right? So Karl Marx doesn't want to actually work for a living. He just wants to write, and that's what he did. He wrote and tried to start, political revolutions in different countries. And the good news is that he died penniless, right? Again, Karl Marx could afford such a luxurious lifestyle. He could become a crusader. It never dawned on Karl Marx that, hey, maybe you ought to go and shut the heck up and let people do what they want. And, well, now you know what communism has done. And thanks, Karl, you killed 100 million people without shedding a bullet. It was all starvation and an utter failure and collapse of an economic system. Haley Koch, this is a very interesting one. Who the heck is Haley Koch? Well, you don't know Haley Koch, but you might know Thomas Tancredo, who attempted to give a speech against illegal immigration at the University of North Carolina a couple years back. And Haley Koch was one of a group of people that basically broke down the windows, broke down the doors, went in there, and shut down the speech. Now, what's beautiful, and understand the hypocrisy here, again, the cowardice, they're going to hide behind the crusade. They immediately all claimed that their freedom of speech was being violated because they couldn't break down the doors and protest. Meanwhile, they shut down another form of speech. Regardless, you say, well, what kind of person is so arrogant and cocky that they think that they're going to go and tell other people what they can and cannot say, pushing violence to the point of getting arrested? Well, you find out that Haley Koch is the daughter of Chris and Susan Koch, who are actually quite successful filmmakers. They got a Peabody Award and some other award that I'm not familiar with because I'm not in film. What does she major in? Performance studies with a sexual studies minor. That's very important because we need these people to help us get out of our financial crisis. All right. This picture of her that you see here, she was on a whirlwind tour, a world trip financed by a scholarship or something, and she's at some local African tribe where she's dressing like the natives. In any case, now she is part of, surprise, surprise, various anti-capitalism, anti-Western groups. Did it ever occur to her that maybe she's just too damn young and too damn stupid to know what's best for us? Never did, because it's more important that little Haley Koch, who went to Sidwell and Friends, look it up, she feels good about herself. And the rest of you, 299 million Americans, get to do what she tells you. Pol Pot. You want to see what the risks of Crusaderism are? Here it is. Pol Pot, born into a moderately wealthy family, you can look up his background, went to France to study college instead, learned communism, and then we returned, more or less killed 2 million people in Cambodia. That's the very, very quick history of Pol Pot. Right? It didn't occur to Pol Pot that maybe his ideas weren't the best. It didn't occur to Pol Pot that maybe the economic utopia is trying to force down the people wouldn't work, because he never really cared about the socialist utopia. Pol Pot was interested in being a crusader and having point and purpose to his life. Right? And the consequences is 2 million people killed through the Khmer Rouge. Okay, another crusader, Nancy Pelosi. And understand, I know everything I've picked on so far have been leftist causes, but again, set that aside for now and take a look at this. Nancy Pelosi is the is the daughter of the mayor of Baltimore. Her father was also a House of Representatives member, I think. But basically, again, Nancy Pelosi just rode around in a convertible all day, didn't really have to work. Gets her Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science. Again, no real desire to work hard at life. Doesn't really care, well, isn't this interesting? I'm going to major in a hobby. Right? And if you look at her background, all right, most people would have accidentally fallen into the private sector and done a little stint, like a month or two. Nancy Pelosi has no private sector experience. She has no real world working experience. I'm not even working in the government. She has been in public office, a politician, the entire time. It behooves the question, why would you ever elect somebody like that who shares absolutely no experiences with the population? Right? But neither here nor there, 100% politician. Now, she went from daddy to hubby number one to hubby number two, joined the Democrat Party, participated in various political campaigns and activities, runs for Congress, inevitably becomes Speaker of the House. But we have a Speaker of the House who's never worked for a living. How do you get to that position of power in the United States of America? It's actually a testament as to what the condition of America is when we let a spoiled little brat like this into the third most powerful position in the United States government. Right? Barack Obama. I love Barack Obama. But again, here we see the traits and trends of a crusader. He's the son of a rather well-to-do economist. His father was a Kenyan economist. His mother was an anthropology doctorate. So again, they weren't starving, getting by. Gets his Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science with an emphasis in international relations. So again, you had no intention of actually working for a living, did you, Barack? Now, he did have 1 year of private sector experience at a company called Business International Corporation. I had more than 1 year experience shoveling poop at a greenhouse in Milwaukee. Which after he quickly became a community organizer, went to law school, surprise, surprise, taught in academia, surprise, surprise, and now is the President of the United States. How? And the reason he had, again, he could afford the background. He had a wealthy background. He could run for president. And frankly, he had nice pecs. That's how he got elected, and because too many kids watch American Idol nowadays. But again, a crusader. Barack Obama didn't become president because he thought he was the best qualified individual. If he was intellectually honest, he'd say, dude, I ain't got no real world experience. He's an ideologue. He's a politician. He's using you people for a career and money. You wonder why he plays golf all the time and he's flying all over the place? It ain't about the United States, people. It's about Barack Obama party time. George Bush, all right, again, being intellectually honest. GW, not 41. His daddy was the president. Okay, there's nepotism for you. And does George Bush go into the private sector? Not really. George Bush did go into the military. He's the only president to have his MBA. So you hope you'd hope. Okay, MBA, maybe there's hope we'll get some real world experience. And for about 5 years, he runs an oil company in a Texas Rangers. I want to know how, with a 5-year private sector resume, you end up running oil companies and running baseball teams. Don't you work, there's no mailroom anymore? You don't work up to staff accountant and then senior accountant and then maybe the CFO? He just, boom. Well, of course, if you look, he gets the financing through mommy and daddy. So he does a 5-year stint, and what does he do? He runs for politics, of course, because he's so wise and infinite in wisdom that he should really be president of the United States. GW is no more than a Republican version of Mark Dayton. Both trust fund babies, both no real world experience, and you people wonder why you get the government you deserve. Now, in general, it's not that hard to find your crusaders. Again, just follow some of the key tenets. Upper middle income or rich, majoring in a worthless subject. They champion some crusader cause, no real world experience, and a disproportionate number of them end up invariably going into politics. They're either telling you what to do through some kind of nonprofit group or some kind of political group, or they actually go into government itself. All right, part 4, consequences of Crusaderism. All right. First, we have some economic consequences. Understand that as wealth goes up in the nation, although that trend is changing, people can afford to go and major in hobbies instead of actual careers. And so I apologize for the shortness of this chart. It's the only data that the OECD has. It only goes back to 1998. But if you extrapolate this trend line, and especially consider the 1950s, you see more and more people going into the fluffy arts rather than going into careers that actually produce something in the world, like engineering, the sciences, accounting, and stuff like that. Right? This will result in a decrease in economic production. And not will result in a decrease in economic production, it already has resulted in a decrease in economic production. When you major in political science and your job description is to raise awareness or to empower youth, that doesn't contribute to GDP, people. Again, you're not producing squat. You're not helping or advancing society. You're taking money either through taxation or through charitable donations and doing nothing with it except spending it on yourself. You see this decrease in economic production in what I call generational GDP. This is basically just the economic growth rate averaged over 20 years. Economic growth is very volatile, and you can't see a trend or discern a trend from it. So if you average it over 20 years, you start to see a trend. And this is scary. People should really look at this chart. It should be on the front page of Drudge Report, but it isn't. You see economic growth back from the 40s to the 60s, averaging 4.25%, 4.25% per year. It's decreased now to 2.5%. Admittedly, the latest recession took a toll on it, but the overall trend is going down. This has severe ramifications for the future economics of the country in terms of IRA retirements, 401k retirement in general, Social Security, government finances. But the larger point is that more and more people become crusaders, less and less actual production is produced, and it basically cripples our finances. Now, in response to the Crusaders, the economy has to create jobs for these people. And you'd say, well, in a free market economy, we just won't hire them. Not when you vote all Democrats into office and put Barack Obama in charge. The stimulus plan was not really a stimulus plan in a Keynesian sense. It was basically a way for Barack Obama to give a lot of money to a lot of political supporters. Look at where some of the stimulus money goes. It goes to arts programs, theater programs, these programs. It doesn't go to the Young Accountants Association of America. So you see careers in these fields being boosted as people vote more and more money to be financing these type programs. So you have government, nonprofits, education, journalism, although the industry is dying but not without government help, religion, and divinity. Right? Here you see government spending as a percentage of GDP, showing that we are spending more and more, and this has been going on for quite some time. Beforehand, the federal government spent about 2% of GDP. It went up, you see, of course, World War I and World War II, and taking those out. We've slowly gone up to about 25%, and now under Barack Obama, it's at 30%. You throw state and local in there, you're at 40, some states 45% of your money is spent by the government. Right? Again, these people need jobs. Whether they actually are productive and have to answer to the efficiencies of the free market is inconsequential. Then you face the question another trend you'll see is, what is a sociology major to do if they can't find a job? When they can't find their government job, there's not enough money, states and local governments are cutting back on spending, or they're just tight budgets. You have a worthless degree, so what do? You go to law school, okay? The bastion for people with worthless degrees. This is a scary chart, people. Lawyers as a percentage of the population. It just keeps going up and up and up and up. This naturally has costs to the economy because tort costs as a percentage of GDP, surprise, surprise, are going up too. Right? So that's another economic consequence as the lawyers come in masses and droves. Now, lawyers are also then prone to pursue another field if they are either really successful and have a lot of money, like Cerisi, or they're failures, but they still have a lot of money from their parents. And that is, they naturally go to politics. Right? And this is probably the most dangerous aspect of Crusaderism, in that the government, as much as free marketers may not like the government, it's necessary, and it's an absolutely vital part of the economy. We need the government to regulate, have law, and things like that. And if this vital part of the economy becomes corrupted with people who do not care about the people, who are not altruistic, but rather run it for their own personal fiefdoms themselves, we start to run into problems like we have today. Now here's a great chart, and I know it's very colorful and you can't really discern a trend with it, but this is the Minnesota State Legislature by major. And you could go ahead and do it for your own state, you could do it for the federal government. I guarantee you're going to come up with the exact same statistics. And so you have all these different majors, and they even have a rhetoric major. Go look that guy up, a rhetoric major. And you say, well, okay, well, what's going on here? Well, I simplified it into this pie chart here. Representatives or congressmen with worthwhile degrees and congressmen with worthless degrees. The worthless degrees are about 80% of the entire Minnesota state legislature. Only about 1/5 of the state legislature has degrees that matter, that are productive. Right? This is the answer as to why you people have bad government. This is the answer why we have perpetual deficits. There's always a deficit crisis. Do you know that there's not one accounting major in the entire state legislature? But, you know, again, the people of Minnesota, they want to vote in flowers and puppies and unicorns and Barack Obama, and we don't need any of you mean accountants telling us the fiscal realities of our budget. Right? Again, it shows you that the people who are running for public office really aren't altruistic. They have been telling you people what you've wanted to hear so they get reelected, because they are incapable of the tough fatherly love that would actually help and advance society and be in the best interest of the population. They are in it for a career politics, a career in politics. Now, another economic consequence is that there's going to be a disconnect from financial or economic reality. Understand we've had so much wealth built up in this nation that people, a high percentage of the population, either doesn't have to work or doesn't have to work really hard. And we've never had to actually worry about personal fiscal responsibility. And I have no limit to the number of stories that I could tell you about various clients that I have who are in their 50s and 60s and have decided just now to start saving up for retirement. Okay? People are completely unaware that you have to, of any sense of responsibility for saving for retirement, let alone any kind of simple budgeting or personal financial management, which again led to the housing crisis where people just thought they could borrow all their money out of their house. Now this is going to have an effect on the economy and finances of the future company. First, we are working less. You look here, number of hours the average person works in different countries. In the United States, we've gone from 2,000 down to about 8,000. Right? So we don't want to work as much. And technology should allow for that a little bit. But we don't want to spend less. Well, how do you pay for more stuff when you don't work as much? Well, right here, household debt as a percentage of GDP. We borrow the money to pay for things we can't afford. You see debt here, household debt as a percentage of GDP, skyrocketing from 20% back in the 50s up to 100% today. The reason why, we're just too lazy. We don't want to work, right? But we still want to spend. The problem is incurring debt like this will inevitably cause a financial crisis, if it hasn't caused it already, or an economic collapse, because we never will be able to generate the economic production to actually pay down the debt, let alone support our own living expenses. You see this in the government as well. The government debt as a percentage of GDP has gone, it's ebbed and flowed, gone from about 28% up to a high today of 55% for non-war time. Again, whether you're the private sector or the public sector, people cannot actually pay for what they want to consume. It's very politically unpopular, if not impossible, for politicians to actually force the taxpayer to pay for the amount of money that we want to spend. And so, to stay in power, the politicians don't do what's intellectually honest and the tough fatherly love and say, look, we're going to have to raise your taxes to actually pay for this stuff. No, they say, well, we want to bribe people with government spending, and we want to cut taxes, and we'll hopefully die before this financial crisis and this crushing debt ever comes around. But at least I got to drive my Ferrari and live in a fancy home before anyone was the wiser. Right? Another interesting aspect of Crusaderism is because we're lazy, we don't want to pay for anything, is this bizarre reliance on perpetually increasing asset prices. And what I mean by perpetually increasing asset prices is, if you look how we plan for retirement, it's we throw our money into a 401k, we throw our money into an IRA, we throw our money into our house, and magically these assets are always in perpetuity going to go up in value. Well, one has to ask the question, why do assets in general go up in value? Why do stock prices go up? Why do houses go up? The reason they go up is because what they generate in terms of production goes up in value as well. So for example, stock prices are driven by what corporations produce. That is profits. So as profits go up, stock prices go up. Housing, you say, well, what does a housing generate? Well, housings generate rent. So as rent goes up, housing goes up. If profits don't go up or rents don't go up, then prices should not go up. Right? So the ratio between the price and whatever drives the price value, stocks or rent or earnings or rent, should go up as well. Now the chart we have here shows you the S&P 500's PE ratio. In other words, that ratio of price to earnings for the average stock in the United States. Now the red line there shows you that the historical average has been 15. In other words, we have paid on average $15 in stock price to be entitled to $1 in earnings. And what's particularly scary is the past 30 years. We see here at 2000 the peak of the dot-com bubble. We were paying almost $45 in stock price for that same dollar in earnings. In other words, we were paying 3 times as much as we were in a stock price for that same dollar in earnings. Naturally, that was not sustainable. The stock market came crashing down. This is the stock market crash in 2000. Did it go below the 15 mark? Did stocks all of a sudden become affordable? No. And instead, the stocks rallied again to 14,000, only to crash once again after the housing bubble burst. Now, what's interesting is most people thought, well, stocks are a great buy. Well, if you look at the chart, right at the bottom of the market, when the market was at 7,500, that was accurately valued. That wasn't overvalued or undervalued. That's where stocks should have been trading at, only to immediately reinflate the bubble again. The reason this is happening is because people are investing their money in the stock market for retirement. with little to no regard as to whether the earnings are there to validate or rationalize the stock prices that we see today. So even though the economy is horrible, corporate profits are in the tank, we're trading at about, a 25% premium now over what it historically should be. Right? The reason why is that people have never had the concept of just what it takes to produce the amount of wealth necessary to rationalize high asset prices. And without that production in economic growth, corporate profits, rigorous studying, industrial production, creativity, innovation, economic growth, capitalism, your stock prices, your housing prices are never going to be high enough to actually afford a retirement. This ultimately results in what I call the atrophy or the carrion economy, wherein that we're not producing enough to actually support ourselves, thereby we have to live on what remains of the economy, like a carcass. The United States is not this economic juggernaut it was in the 50s, and we're producing everything and we're making everything and innovation is great, like we're growing. Consider it a corpse. There's a certain amount of meat and flesh that hasn't rotted yet, and if you look at what's happening in the economy, most public and private sector is starting to eat off of that flesh, much like a vulture. Right? Not to sound so macabre and down, but that's how I see it. So you start to see people making more and more of a living off of what remains. Lawsuits, lawyers, law, regulation, more government, nothing actually getting produced. What's also scary is you start to see the private sector getting corrupted, where the private sector is no longer about let's go start up a new corporation, let's go and create a new thing, let's go and start a new company, build a new industry. It's more about it's easier for us to lobby and bribe a congressman to have legislation enacted in our favor so we keep our own little fiefdom. Well, obviously you see why economic growth has been collapsing from 4.5% to 2.25%. This will ultimately result in the collapse of the dollar. Not only ultimately result, has already resulted in a trend downward. Since we don't make anything in the United States, but we are printing off a lot of money, those dollars have less stuff that gives them value. Understand the only reason a currency has value is because you can buy stuff with it. So the more stuff you make, and assuming you keep your money supply constant, the more value those same dollars have in terms of purchasing power. Well, here you see the dollar collapsing by about 40%. Right? And the only reason for this latest uptick is because the euro is actually a less sucky currency than ours. Right? But we still, in terms of production per dollar, has been actually declining. Another scary prediction, I predict entitlement programs will collapse. Right? And forget Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Unless the economy starts growing real well, unless we get Crusaders out, and we actually get productive members of society into getting the economy growing so the tax base can increase, we're not going to be able to afford everything we've promised ourselves in the future. Also, it's not just government programs where the financing isn't going to be. You're also going to see at least a lessening or scaling back of private retirement programs. Pensions are not funded that well, or they're underfunded simply because the majority of the money is invested in the stock market. And again, unless the economy starts growing, there's not going to be the economic growth and therefore the profits to drive stock prices back up to make sure that your 401k plan or your pension account is now once again fully funded. We're still, I do believe, I'm about 50 to 60% sure, the government is going to inevitably rescind the Roth treatment or the tax preference treatments for your IRAs, your 401ks, 403bs, and 457s. Right? Not quite sure, but again, the demands of the spending that we've given through entitlement programs are going to outstrip anything that we can tax, and we're inevitably going to have to start looking for other money. Worse still is there's a progressively increasing chance that we're going to pull in Argentina, where the government is going to go and effectively nationalize pensions and retirement accounts. I'm only about 20% certain of that, but increasing. So unless the Crusaders actually start producing, and the country starts producing producers, less and less Crusaders, less and less hobbyists, less and less luxurious Nancy Pelosi's, frankly, the economic production to provide for a nice little socialist utopia that we've promised ourselves just isn't going to be there. Inevitably, the U.S. is going to look like the pigs: Italy, Greece, Portugal, Ireland, and Spain. We're not going to be any different from Europe, and we literally will lose our exceptionalism because we're following the exact same mixed market model that Europe is. Now, social consequences. Understand, because of the United States, because of capitalism, because of free markets, we have eliminated all the major plights and plagues that have affected humanity for the past several thousand years. War, famine, plague, advances in medicine. All the major genuine crises and crusades have been taken care of. And with a generation or two of crusaders, the moderate ones have at least been addressed. And what you will see is an increasingly pettiness of the crusades that are being championed. Right? We already are championing the quadriplegic turtles, I'm sure, somewhere. But a perfect example is some kids over in St. Paul, high school kids, decided to go and lobby the St. Paul City Council to pass a law that banned the sale of candy cigarettes in St. Paul. And it kind of behooves the question, do we not have more pressing matters right now? Do we not have more important issues to deal with? So you will see, and another trend you might see is increasingly younger people joining crusades because they feel empowered. Just think about that. These kids who now got that law passed in St. Paul, think about how arrogant and cocky they are now. Like, look, we passed legislation. Not one of them is now going to become a doctor. They're all going to think it's great to become a politician and go into public office and not produce anything. Right? Second, because of the increasing amount, not to mention the scope of the various crises and crusades that are going to be championed, if more and more legislation is enacted and more lobbying is successful, many and more aspects of your individual life are going to be either regulated or outlawed or banned. Smoking cigarettes, now you have to recycle. There are towns in Britain where they actually send people to inspect your garbage to make sure you're recycling. You can't have bonfires. You can't look for agates in South Dakota, things like that. It is basically going to be a random and chaotic tyranny that singles out specific aspects of your free individual life and bans them one by one by one. In that sense, what's going to happen is you're going to lose your individual freedom, and the nanny state, or the state in general, is going to increase. And, you know, sure, it's cigarettes, booze, and cars, and fat, but soon it'll be looking, clothes, kissing, sex, thinking, talking, and don't worry, down the road it's coming. The other thing is forfeiture of individual responsibility over government control. With everything becoming regulated and codified, more and more aspects of your life are going to be disciplined, or at least governed and regulated by the government. You also see what I call fashionable brainwashing. So we already see this now, the going green fad. And I'm not talking the kids being brainwashed in K through college education. That's already happening. That will continue to happen. But where people will engage in the emperor has no clothes mentality. Corporations and adults will either lack independent critical thinking or completely lack a spine. And you see this with corporations just rolling over on their backs like puppies to go green. All right? Everything's green. Pepsi's green. We're going to go green. All right? British Petroleum's green. All right? And nothing more than marketing. Worse still is you're going to see adults who should be the front line of defense against this tyranny, this brainwashing against the children. They will join it because they'll seem fashionable. The middle-aged woman carrying her Whole Foods bag, going to Whole Foods, 6 or 7 times, spending a lot more gas than she would have if she just had an SUV and had gotten the paper and the plastic, but she'll feel good about it. Not because she actually believes in going green, but because it's for her own sake, because people will find it fashionable. All of this regulation, all of this progressive, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that, oh, that's politically incorrect, oh, you must go green, is going to just crush creativity and innovation. In other words, your renegades, mavericks, and entrepreneurs, they're going to go extinct. Not that they're going to die out, they're just not going to participate anymore. You're not going to have a Howard Hughes, you're not going to have Andrew Carnegie, you're not going to have a Rockefeller, you're not going to have Bill Gates, and you're not going to have Tony Stark. They're going to decide to instead rather go galt and go fishing simply because they'll look at the onerous environmental or legal or employment legislation and regulation and say, you know, it ain't going to work. Or frankly, they'll just go overseas. This you can already see now. Because of this wave of Crusaderism, because of the wave of crusades and causes, and you should be noble, and you should be this, and if you're not that, well then you're a racist, you're a bigot, you're a misogynist, whatever else have you. It is putting an emphasis on being nice more important than being right. And you can see this in politics where politicians have to be nice instead of being right. Instead of being truthful and telling their population how the real world works, they're going to lie to them and tell them what they want to hear. But not just in government, but more so in the private sector. The being nice over being right has absolutely crippled the private sector. You no longer can speak freely, not because the private sector isn't free, but because the mentality, the brainwashing that has already occurred, and being politically correct and avoiding lawsuits, and let's do that, oh, wouldn't it look nice if we did this and went green, and we donated some money here and donated some money, then we look at our marketing, we're looking really good. That has crushed any kind of ability to speak freely and bluntly about anything that may be going on in the corporation. For example, I was a credit analyst over in various different banks, tried to say we shouldn't make these loans in real estate. And the pure hell I received for daring to point out that a lot of these people couldn't pay back their loans or shouldn't have been lent the money in the first place, what absolutely went against the grain. Right? Truth is no longer going to be appreciated. It's going to be being politically correct. It will corrupt the private and the public sectors. Now, as we become politically correct more and more, and we have to abide by all these crusades, and Crusaderism inevitably permeates every aspect of society, economic growth will again slow. And I showed you this chart before. However, what I also include now in this chart is not just the 20-year average growth rate of GDP, but the standard deviation, 20-year average standard deviation of economic growth. This shows you that what we're essentially doing is trading growth for stability. And the reason why is that well, in part because of onerous regulation, government having a larger percentage of the economy, but again, this mentality where we're allowing Crusaders and Crusaderism to have an effect on our mentality, where, oh, it's too risky, where we have this huge aversion to risk. And this will unfortunately result in a mentality of safety at all costs. You see this with people with their children. It doesn't matter how much it actually impairs the child. We need safety at all costs. The kid can't go out of the house. We need safety at the schools. We need this. We need that. We need safety at work. We have onerous safety, safety, safety. Well, the problem with safety is not only does it come at a cost of economic growth, it also comes at a risk of innovation, and it also opens the door for government control. Right? Safety is the perfect crusading vehicle by which the government could come in, and as long as it's safety, well, then it's noble and just. So unfortunately, you will see that occurring as we're going down the road. Part 5, what can be done? Well, it depends. If you insist on what I call the path of most resistance, you can still think there's hope. There are several things that you can do. One, demand term limits, because the majority of, or at least the plurality of Crusaders inevitably go into politics. If you kill the possibility that there's any chance to have lifelong employment in politics, you'll make that segment, that vital part of the economy, immune to Crusaders. 2, you eliminate worthless degrees. Not that you don't allow business or colleges to offer liberal arts or sociology or what have you, but you stop the funding. If you go to get your degree in communications, the state is not going to subsidize you. Right? Mandate constitutional education for K through 12 so that the kids know what the Constitution is and what their rights are. 2, mandate financial and economic education, non-biased, for personal financial management for kids so that they don't make the mistakes my generation, the previous generation, the current generation have made. Eliminate government funding for any nonprofit organization. The government should not be in the business of any kind of charity or stuff like that. It should be at the charity, at the kindness of private donors who actually have a better ability to control and say whether or not that charity is actually going to produce tangible benefits and not just be used as a vehicle for employment while falsely claiming to champion some noble crusade or another. Also, constitutional amendment to limit government, state, federal, and local, all combined to 15% of GDP. Government spending and government revenue to just 15% of GDP. Again, you take the money out of it, you force the charity into the private sector, it's going to make it much more efficient and much more effective, and we get rid of Crusaders basically using government money as a means by which to start a career. This is not likely to happen because not everybody studies economics and the voting population isn't quite as intelligent as you'd like them to be. So what it also boils down to is good parenting. If the public schools aren't going to do it, you got to step in. You have to teach your children independent and critical thinking so that when they come home with a pamphlet with Al Gore's face on it saying you should stop driving your car, you could tell your child how to stand up to the teacher or how to stand up to the school. Teach your children fiscal discipline, saying, look, kid, here's a budget, here's how it works. Simple stuff would have prevented the housing crisis just setting up a budget that would have prevented the housing crisis. Teach the children the real United States history. Yes, for all of our problems, isn't it kind of curious how the United States became so successful? Isn't it amazing how everyone wants to move here still yet? Obviously, we must have done something right. And whereas public schools like to focus on what we did wrong for political purposes, you got to teach the kids, what did the United States do right? And we've done a ton of right things. Teaching the children the Constitution, Heritage Foundation, be more than happy to get you a pocket Constitution. And demand from the schools reading, writing, and arithmetic, and nothing else. It is none of the public schools' business to educate your children about social responsibility, community, or whatever. That is your jurisdiction. You pay them to teach them reading, writing, and arithmetic so that they can go and get a job and be self-employed and not move back at home when they're 40. This would probably inevitably require that some of you must run for school board. And the reason I focus so much, you say, well, why the children? Because that's where it starts. It's easier to get a kid independent, critical thinking when they're 8 or 9 or 10, rather than take a 22-year-old who's been brainwashed since K through college education and get them to actually think critically and intellectually honest, look up facts and statistics and data before getting them to actually abandon their ideology. What I advocate, though, is this, and that is nothing. I'm of the opinion that the wealth has been built up in this nation to the point that there's already a critical mass of crusaders, and nothing's going to turn this tide until people actually get their wish and they get to live it, and they have to sit and think, why am I unemployed, and why isn't there bread in the grocery stores, and how come I still have to pay for health care and things like that. Which then leads me to the only thing that you can do, and that is go gulp, which will be another topic of economics with Aaron. Life is too short to argue with ignorance, people. Go fishing, go sleep in, minimize your expenses, play video games, do whatever you want. And I know I sound kind of hypocritical doing this presentation and then everything, but you got to put yourself first every once in a while and not necessarily worry about the crusades of the crusaders. That's the end. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Look for me next time when we do Going Galt. We'll also have Economics with Aaron presentation on corporate taxes and many more things to come. Also, stop by and say hello. You can see me at aaronclary.com and see all the crazy, wild stuff that I do there. In the meantime, don't work too hard and make sure you're below a certain income tax bracket.